Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's true that we go through different stages in life, and one of the things that I have learned as we continue this Forever Friends series is that oftentimes the things that we give thanks for are that there were certain people there at just the right time, in just the right life passage. Today I'd like to remember and give thanks to the living God for my friend Nick Eicher. If you are at all a Christian interested in news from a conservative perspective, then you're certainly familiar with World Magazine. Nick, when we first met, served there as the managing editor and has been climbing up the chain ever since. He's now the head of all content at World Magazine, as well as the co-host of World Radio. But our paths crossed back in the mid to late 90s. And it was a time frame when, for both of us, we were kind of escaping out of being at the bottom of the rung in terms of input and authority and influence, and getting our first taste of changing that. He serving as the managing editor of this very important magazine, and through him and because of him, I was given opportunity to write for that magazine while I was also serving as the editor of Table Talk magazine. I wrote about a half a dozen to a dozen columns for World during those times, and one of the things that I remember about my relationship with Nick is we had a really healthy level of overlap in terms of our ideology. We were both Reformed, both Christians, both conservative, but we also had differences. I would certainly claim that I'm more conservative than him. And so we had these sort of shared foundational commitments, but had sort of wiggle room to wrestle over the implications of those shared commitments. And Nick is one smart fella, one very clear and logical thinker, and so I really enjoyed those opportunities to wrestle with him over things. He also is a wordsmith and has just a great sense of humor. Now, I want to tell you about the day we missed it all. One of the ways that we would see each other fairly regularly, well, once a year anyway, was at the Evangelical Press Association convention. Because of my role at Table Talk and his at World, we would always end up at this same convention, and we would spend time together. And on this particular year, I believe we were in Minneapolis, I think, and it was during a presidential campaign, and we had somebody, I don't remember who it was, scheduled to come and speak at this convention on this particular evening, maybe the closing banquet. And that person had to drop out at the last second, and it was arranged to have one of the presidential candidates come and speak to the Evangelical Press Association convention, and it was that one candidate that I was the most excited about, Ambassador Alan Keyes. And because of, I guess, his work with World Magazine and maybe his boss Joel's connection with the top hierarchy at the Evangelical Press Association, Nick was tapped to go pick up Alan Keyes from one of the local municipal airports because he would be coming in on a private plane. Well, I got tapped to ride shotgun with Nick to go pick up Alan Keyes, and I don't know that I've ever been more excited. Unfortunately, over the course of the next several hours, we had massive thunderstorms, closed airports, great uncertainty about which airport we're supposed to be at, most of which they're all closed because they're municipal airports and it's nighttime. And eventually, Nick and I turned back without Alan Keyes and headed back to the hotel where the convention was being held, and were able to hear the last 2 minutes of Alan Keyes' address, because apparently, somehow, he landed somewhere and got there. But we missed out on it, but just the fun of the adventure of trying to go get him is something that I will not soon forget. Nick has, as I've said, he's continued to succeed and do well with World Magazine. He is just a good, solid fella. And, I haven't talked to him in probably a decade or more, but I tell you, I do miss him. I miss our time together. And I hope that he's well. I will, I suspect, not have too much trouble getting this to him, but if I fail, and if you know my friend Nick, just tell him, hey, you might want to check out this particular podcast. And as always, I'm also asking you for your stories. Have you reached out to any old friends and let them know that you're grateful to God for them? That's how I feel about Nick Eicher. I miss him. I'm grateful for him, and I ask that God would indeed bless him. We are today precisely 1 month away from the formal opening of the Shepherd's College. If you have been following the various outlets through which we do teaching, through Dunamis Fellowship, whether it is on our Facebook page or on Twitter or in the blog pieces that I post at rcsproulJR.com or on this podcast or the Ask RC podcast, everywhere you go, there we are talking about the Shepherd's College. And we're doing it because we're excited about it, we believe in it, and we want others to share our excitement. We've affirmed and talked in various and sundry ways and places about what is distinctive about the Shepherd's College. Just let me remind you that this is a pastoral training college built on the premise that we need to build up those qualities that the Scripture describes as those qualities that are fitting and appropriate for elders in the church. I believe in an educated clergy. What I don't believe is that an academic model, which is what you have at the seminary, in the seminary system, that an academic model is the best way to prepare. But rather, we believe, as we do in all things, which is, again, why we always ask to hear from you, we believe that education happens best when we're in conversation with each other. And so here's how the Shepherd's College works. I have come up with a planned curriculum that will cover the things that people need to have covered in order to serve well as a pastor. We're going to be studying in the first semester an Old Testament survey. We're going to do the first part of systematic theology. We're going to look at the work of hermeneutics. We're going to look, which is the science of interpretation. We're going to look at apologetics. That's the kind of thing we're going to do. We're going to be reading on those things and then talking about those things. Once a week, I will meet with the students and we will talk through what it is they've learned in their reading and how that impacts the work of gospel ministry. I'm able to bring to the table both the experience that I have as a college professor, as well as the experience that I have as a pastor in the church. Just the other day we did a brief video that we put up on Facebook in which I talked about some of the most difficult pastoral calls that I've ever had to make, and how different that experience is from sitting in a seminary reading a book. I want our students to have that conversation, not just with a fellow who's written a wonderful dissertation somewhere along the line, but from a fellow who has, again, sat in those living rooms dealing with broken families and death and illness, etc. Another distinctive of the Shepherd's College is that we don't want to be cost prohibitive at all. We have structured our fees in a way that's less than a third of what you might pay at a Bible college or even at a seminary. Significantly less. I think it's probably closer to a quarter of the cost, believing this principle that, when someone goes off to war, they don't pay their own way. They don't pay for basic training. And we don't believe that those who are preparing for gospel ministry should have to either. I wish we could offer this for free. We do have scholarship funds that have been given generously from others, but that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. If you agree with this goal, if you agree with this premise that maybe there's a better way, a more biblical way, a more discipleship way to prepare men for gospel ministry, and if you agree with me that men should not have to pay for their preparation to go to war, then you can help us with your donations. You can support the work of the Shepherd's College by giving to a scholarship fund, or giving a scholarship or a partial scholarship. You can do it however you want to do it. You can do it simply by supporting Dunamis Fellowship, because it's all the same thing at the end of the day. The process, by the way, is abundantly easy. Soon, God willing, we'll have a portal at shep.college. You can read more about the Shepherd's College there. Shep, shep.college. We'll have a portal there where you can make donations. But for now, those donations can go right through the donate button that you can find at rcsproulJr.com. Not complicated at all. You can leave a message and say, hey, I want this to go toward a scholarship for a student. And by the way, if you have students in mind, or if you are a student who's interested in the Shepherd's College, we would love to hear from you. Send us an email. You can send it to hellorcjr@gmail.com. You can also find an email address at shep.college that you can write to us there. Will you get behind us? Will you support this vision, this endeavor to reform and go back to the sources for how God established the process of preparing men for ministry, not by academic institutions, but through relationships? We would love to hear from you. Friends, for the health and well-being of the church and for the feeding of the flock, we must preach rather than teach. I don't know if it happens at all seminaries, but it did happen at the seminary I attended. Seminaries presumably are established with the goal of preparing men for gospel ministry. But where I went, more young men than not were there preparing not to serve in the church, but in the seminary. They came, they looked up to their professors, and they dreamed that one day they too would be professors. Trouble was, precious few of them make it that far. The pressures of families and work cause most who had hoped for an academic career to, quote, settle for a pastoral one. What tends to console those who so settle, I suspect, is the prospect of having a flock of sheep to serve as a substitute for a classroom of seminarians. These men can pretend to be professors because they are given, as pastors, a captive audience. The result? Sermons that sound, feel, and act more like lectures than sermons. Preachers who are really teachers, and sheep with swollen heads and shriveled hearts. What we are too often left with is, quote, worship, where we hurry through the preliminaries so we can get to the good stuff, where the pastor downloads his knowledge into the heads of the flock. We, especially those of us who consider ourselves heirs of the Reformation, have jumped from the wise belief that sound teaching can change our hearts to the foolish notion that sound teaching will automatically change our hearts. We react against the sloppy sentimentalism of the broader evangelical church, where we're told that doctrine divides and we're encouraged to merely emote when we gather together for worship and fall off the other side of the horse. We think that if we have all our theological ducks in a row, then we are ready to inherit the kingdom. We need to reform our thinking about our feelings. We need to confess that dry orthodoxy is not only real, but is pandemic. What we need is preaching. Preaching, like teaching, certainly involves and includes the passing along of information. But unlike teaching, it is designed to go through the mind and into the heart. Preaching not only explains, but exhorts. It not only proclaims, but pierces. Preaching causes those who hear it not merely to affirm that what they have heard is true, but causes them to cry out, "Brethren, what must we do to be saved?" Preaching by the power of the Holy Spirit causes hearts of flesh to burn with joy for the glory of the Son. We must put away the pride that says from the pulpit, "I must give these people some new insight that they could not have discovered on their own." We also must put away the pride that says from the pew, "Let us see if the pastor can come up with something that is both new and orthodox." We must come to the preaching of the word prepared to be changed. The word is not smarter than a supercomputer, but sharper than any two-edged sword. Teaching talks about the sword. Preaching wields it. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets. to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.